we all would feel better. I think we all would feel better about sending more money to the schools if we knew we were going to get better results.
Can you repeat what they...
The question was basically, we're sending more money to the schools, but the schools are giving a terrible result. They're providing a bad education for too many of our students. I share that concern. I think this really difficult news would go down easier if we knew that an extra $11 million would result in a dramatically better education for our students. I understand that. So the reason that we were in a lawsuit with the state, I mentioned this early on, is because the state's running our schools right now. They've now had our schools for 6 years. And I believe, like most residents, because we did a survey on this, that the schools are not really any better off 6 years later, and I think we should take our schools back because the state intervention has not improved the quality of our schools. So first of all, I'm fighting really hard to get our schools back. As early as this summer, I have a piece of legislation in the General Assembly to do that. The state has to sign off on that. I can't just take them back. The state has to do that. And so we have a bill to take our schools back. We also, because in addition to not educating most of our students properly, I also don't think they make very good choices about their budget. And I think they waste money. And so part of the settlement that included the extra funding gave us permission to do a financial review of their spending choices so that we could have some confidence that this extra money will actually find its way to students and teachers and not get wasted on administrators and consultants and the other nonsense that they waste money on. And so that financial review is underway right now. And we will be highlighting the ways in which I think they are wasting money. When I say financial review, I don't think anybody's stealing. I just think they're wasting it. I don't think it's resulting in a better education for our children. But that's something that I'm also very concerned about. And I think the solution is to get our schools back. We have a brand new school board that's eager to get to work. The city council shares my point of view on this entirely. We're totally on the same page on this. To take our schools back and start delivering better results for our students.
So first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming out. I know it is St. Patrick's Day, so for whoever's Irish here, I apologize. But I just want to thank the mayor for coming out personally because, as you know, Scott Slater, Representative Slater is here as well. And we both cornered the mayor and said that we're not going to take the hits on all these questions. So Mayor, you need to come out and take all the questions, and he had no problem coming out. So I want to personally thank the mayor for coming out here because it's not a very comfortable feeling with everybody upset about taxes, especially with the electricity bills and everything. That's not his fault, but I'm just saying all the stuff that we end up paying for now. So I want to thank the mayor for coming out, and I want to thank Dave for organizing this along with myself because this is the biggest place that we had. I think this is one of the biggest meetings that we've had. So Rep. Slater, you want to say something quick? He's got his Irish tie on. He wants this meeting to get over. He's got people waiting for him because he's Irish.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out. Thanks, Jim. Thank you. Just want to say thank you, everyone, for coming out. It's important to learn about the city's finances and where we stand right now and the challenges that the city faces. So the mayor can explain that better than anyone. And I understand that myself too. Lifelong resident. So thank you, Mayor, for coming out and providing a presentation. You're allowing residents to understand the challenges that the city is under and how you're helping navigate its needs. Thank you.
Unlike the event, anybody here doesn't know who I am. I'm Dave Challen, and I'm president of the Reservoir Triangle Neighborhood Association. We're glad to host this together with Councilman Taylor tonight. Just like to recognize a few people. As you know, we had flyers passed out to every house in the entire neighborhood. And I'd like to acknowledge a few of the people that went out and passed them out to your house. So we have Barbara Trainer from Lakeview Drive, Andrea Rossi from Staten Street, Neil Yateman from Rounds Avenue, Patty Gold from Rutherglen Avenue, also Carter Wells from Algonquin Street, and Carolina Robert Santana from Alvin Street. And I don't think I skipped anybody else.
Dave, the way to turn up the volume, they're saying they can't hear that there. I don't know, speak up louder.
Okay.
You know?
And like I say, I can always use more people who would like to help pass out flyers, so especially if you're a little bit younger and you'd like to help out with that, see me before you leave tonight, and I'll be glad to put you to work passing out flyers on your own street. If there's anybody here who didn't sign our sign-in sheets on the clipboards here on the first few tables, be sure to do that so we know who you are, and so that the mayor and Councilman Taylor can send follow-up information to you later on. We'll make sure they have that information too. Just recognize some other important people here. Councilman Taylor already introduced the elected officials. We do have, we're very safe here tonight because we have two of our top police people here. Lieutenant David Tejada, who's our new police commander for this district, replaced Lieutenant Sakal, who I think you had met before, and hopefully in a future meeting, we'll have Lieutenant Tejada here as a guest, all by himself. Tonight is pretty much just for the mayor, but we'll welcome him in a future meeting. And also Captain Richard Fernandez, who I guess is his boss. So glad to have you both here. I thank the mayor for coming. A week ago, we had a Zoom meeting with all the presidents of neighborhood associations throughout the whole city, and gave the presentation he's given tonight, and he invited any neighborhood associations to invite him to give the same presentation to them. And so we did it, and he took us up on it before we had a chance to say no. So we're glad to have you here, Brett. And I'll turn it back to Councilman Taylor to introduce the mayor, not that he needs any introduction.
Thank you, Dave. So Mayor Brett Smiley, with his green tie, he will take it over. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Good evening, everybody. I have about maybe a 15-minute presentation just to help people see visually the budget challenge that we're facing this year, and then I will stay as long as I need to stay to answer every question. My goal tonight is to help all the residents of the city, particularly Reservoir tonight, but as Dave points out, I'm going to every neighborhood that will have me, to understand a little bit of the challenge that we're facing this year in the city's budget, why this year is different than any other year, and then to try to give a preview and hopefully to lower your anxiety about the discussion around increased taxes. Because it's important to know that you don't actually know what your tax rate is going to be, what your tax bill is going to be until we set the rate, and we haven't set the rates yet. So if we could begin just with a little bit on what the tax levy is. So every year, the city of Providence collects between 70 and 80% of the total money that we have to spend on everything from schools to police to the public parks and more from property taxes. The tax levy is comprised of a couple different property taxes. When you hear property tax, you probably think about your property tax bill, but it also includes tangible property tax, which is something that businesses pay on inventory, commercial property tax, and as you all know, we no longer have the car tax, but it gets reimbursed by the state now. So last year, the total amount of taxes, property taxes that we collected was almost $400 million. There is a state law that's been in effect for many years that limits how much the tax levy can grow every year. That limit is 4%. And so we would be allowed under state law to collect an additional almost $16 million in taxes in the upcoming year. Now I'm going to explain to you why that's not enough money this year, but that's what would be allowed by state law. So I'm going to go through a little math here. You don't need to do the math. I'm going to show you where it is. But that 4%, $15.8 million. Now we don't collect every dollar that we bill. This is not permission that you don't have to pay your taxes, but on average, approximately 95% of the taxes that we bill get paid. The other 5% go to collections, or we try to recoup that. Maybe someone's filed for bankruptcy or lost their house in foreclosure, something like that. But about 95% of the taxes that we bill get paid. So if you would go to the next slide, please. That 95% of the 15.8 million that I just showed you is $14.9 million. So under the 4% cap, we would expect to receive approximately $14.9 million next year. This is when I say next year, by the way, I'm talking about the city's fiscal year. The city's budget and fiscal years run from July 1 to June 30th. So we're talking about the budget that begins July 1. Now, next year, our costs are expected to go up $21.9 million. So that is the math problem that we're facing as city leaders. Under the 4% cap, we expect to receive $14.9 million, and yet we are obligated to at least $21.9 million, which means that we are $7 million short in the fiscal year that begins on July 1. So where's this $21.9 million come from? First, we have what we owe to our retirees, the pension that we pay for the people who serve the city. This is not a negotiable number. Next year, it's $4.7 million. Some of you might remember when Angel Tavares was mayor, the city went through pension reform. There was a big lawsuit. There was a settlement of that lawsuit with our retirees, and we are now ordered by the court to pay a certain amount every year towards our pension. Next year, that amount is $4.7 million. Additionally, we insure all of our employees. Insurance costs go up every year. Next year, the cost for health care for our employees goes up $1.9 million. I'm going to skip that next one for a second because that's what we're really going to talk about. The contracted labor costs. So almost everybody who works in the city of Providence is a unionized employee. Most of our city employees are laborers, Local 1033. We've got police officers who are members of the FOP. We've got firefighters who are members of the firefighters union. They have contracts. Their contracts provide for raises. Those are not negotiable. We owe $3.7 million next year in contractual raises. That's not raises for people like me. I didn't take a raise last year, and I'm not planning on taking a raise next year. But the people who pick up your trash, clean your parks, plow your streets, they have contractual raises, $3.7 million. And then the big one, the reason that next year is different from any other year, is what we owe the school department. So some of you may have followed back in November, there was a lot of press about a lawsuit with the school department. As you may know, the Providence Public Schools are currently run by the state. They've been run by the state since 2019. And the city of Providence had been in a dispute with the school department since 2019 about how much money we owed the schools. There was a lawsuit that was started between the commissioner and Helica Infante Green and Mayor Lorza. That lawsuit was ongoing when I became mayor a little over 2 years ago. And in November, 4 months ago, we reached the end of the road. We had exhausted every legal avenue. This lawsuit went on for 5 years. We went to mediation twice. Both mediations failed. The lawsuit ultimately was resolved in a way that I would say the city lost. The school department and the Commissioner of Education said that we were not paying our fair share. If you heard me in the press back in November, you might have heard me say that I agreed that the schools were underfunded, but that I did not think that it was fair to ask us to make up for decades of underfunding in 1 year. Unfortunately, the judge disagreed, and the governor and the commissioner disagreed, and so the city lost. And as a result, we are going to catch up a generation of underfunding in 1 year, and we have to pay for it. And that's the problem that we have. So next year, our increase to the school department is $11.4 million. So let's talk about this historical funding. This is Providence's funding of the schools. This goes back to 2012, but the chart would look pretty similar if we went even further back. You'll see from 2012 until 2018, the city gave no extra money to the schools. Just like I said on the previous slide, our labor costs go up every year. People get raises, insurance costs us more money. The city gave no extra money to the schools from 2012 until 2017. Then there was a small increase, and then again, flat funding. This is this orange line. 2025 is the year we're in right now, and 2026 is the year that we're talking about. This big spike in funding. That is catching up for 15 years of underfunding our schools in 1 year. And we have to figure out how to pay for it. So that's what is the budget challenge we have tonight, which is why I have asked for permission from the City Council and from the General Assembly to go over the 4% property tax cap, because 4% is not enough for us to balance this year's budget. Now, just to put it in context so that people know what we're talking about, because these are big numbers, and I would imagine most of you don't care. What you care about is how much are my taxes going to go up. And so, for a frame of reference, for the average house, for every 1% increase in the tax rate is $42 in extra tax for you. So a 4% increase in taxes is $168 more per year. And I'm not saying that that's insignificant, not at all. I know many, many families are struggling to make it all work today, and another $168 is a burden, but at least we'll know what we're talking about here. So the way the process works is communities are allowed to go over the 4% cap if they get permission from the General Assembly. The General Assembly has said, we'll only do it if the mayor asks for it, which I have, and if the City Council approves of it. And so the City Council has a resolution to ask for permission. It passed out of the City Council's Finance Committee last week, and it's going to the full council next week. Just because the council approves that resolution or the General Assembly passes that bill does not mean how much your taxes are going up. That just gives me permission to then propose a budget. The city's budget process will remain the same as it always has been, which is I will submit the budget in April. The City Council will have hearings all the way through April, May, and June, and then by June they pass the budget. And they make changes to my proposed budget. And then it's my decision whether to sign that budget or veto that budget. That's the traditional budget process. This year will be no different. The bill that passes the General Assembly just gives me permission to propose a tax rate that's higher than the 4%. I am doing everything I can. We're very close to finishing the budget. I have to submit it in just a couple weeks to Jim and the other 14 council people. I'm very close to finishing the budget, and I am working very hard to minimize the tax increase. I want to be very honest with everyone. I'm going to propose a tax increase, but I'm trying to keep that tax increase as small as possible. However, there are only 3 ways that we balance a budget, any budget. Can you skip to, yeah. There's only 3 ways this works. And this has got nothing to do with me, this is just how budgets work. Either new taxes, other revenues, which I'll talk about in a second, or cuts to city expenses. That's the only way this works. So the budget that I propose in April will be a combination of all 3 of these things. I think that's the only fair way to do this, which we can't balance this budget without raising some taxes, I believe strongly. But I want to raise taxes as minimally as possible. We're looking for other revenue options, and there will be significant belt tightening in city government. You all should expect that if we're going to raise your taxes, that we are cutting positions, making cuts to programs, and trying to do everything we can to balance this budget without taxes. And so that's the budget that I'm going to put forward. It's a combination of these three things. The other revenues that we're looking at, some of them can be done at the city level, some of them require state legislation. So, for example, I have a proposal in front of the General Assembly this year for a parking tax. So if you pay to park at like the AMP or you're going to a show at PPAC, majority of these people, by the way, are visitors to our city, that they would pay a 7% sales tax on their parking. This is something that many cities around the country do, and it's something that's paid for by the visitor. When someone comes and visits our city, they consume services. Our police protect them. The ambulances are ready to serve them in case there's an accident. Our DPW shovels the sidewalks before they go see a show at PPAC. And so it's fair that they should have to pay something towards the services that they're consuming while they're visiting our city. That is an example of another revenue. There are also things like fines and fees. I'm sure none of you here have ever gotten a parking ticket, but some people get parking tickets. And so we could increase the price of a parking ticket. We could increase the price of other permits. That's what I mean when I say fines and fees or other revenues. So these are the options: new property taxes, other revenues, or cuts. So let's talk about cuts now. Yes? I'm sorry. What's that, sir? Okay, so yeah, okay, so let's answer that question. This is a very popular question. The large nonprofit institutions. So in Providence, approximately 48% of the land in Providence is tax exempt. That's government, the colleges, the hospitals, and then things like churches and other smaller nonprofits. So we uniquely in Rhode Island, Providence worse than any other city in Rhode Island, have a big problem in that almost half of the land is property tax exempt. We have 4 private colleges: Brown, RISD, Johnson & Wales, Providence College. A year and a half ago, I renegotiated with the 4 colleges for a new agreement for payments in lieu of taxes. Another popular question is, why can't we just tax them? These institutions are tax exempt. It is in federal law, and it goes all the way back to the beginning of this country. It would be illegal for me to mail them a tax bill. I don't like it, you cannot like it, but that's the law. They are tax exempt entities. It goes back to literally the 1700s. It is illegal for me or any other city in America. This isn't a uniquely Providence problem. These institutions in every city in America are legally tax exempt. So the only way in which they pay is through negotiation. And so what we did, because when I came into office, they had agreements that were expiring. So a year and a half ago, we renegotiated with the 4 private colleges for new agreements. We were able to get them to double their payments to the city, and the 4 private colleges in Providence now pay more to the city of Providence than any other college or university in the country pay to their city. We can disagree on whether or not, quote, it's enough, but I believe very strongly that it's the best deal we could have gotten, and it is the best deal in the country. Because we have no leverage, because we cannot simply mail them a bill, the only thing you can do is negotiate and to try to pressure and shame them into doing more. But there is no ability to just send them a bill. It's against the law. Please.
They're not paying taxes, and they're
So Brown or RISD or Rhode Island Hospital, which is also tax exempt, any of the tax exempt entities, we can't prevent them from buying land from a private seller. The city doesn't sell them any land. The city has not sold them a single piece of land. But if a private landowner wants to sell, this happens in Alvarez. I agree with you.
And then believe what gets to go where in certain areas around College Hill.
I understand. I live right on the edge of campus. I see it happen all around me. But the city has no authority, neither does the state, by the way, to prevent a private transaction. And if Brown or Providence College or Women and Infants Hospital or any of these institutions make a offer on a piece of property and the person who owns that piece of property chooses to sell it, I can't stop that transaction because I don't like who the buyer is.
But we have to pay the taxes for it.
Is there no way of preventing them to be able to stop acquiring so much at a rapid rate? Is there some kind of provision or anything that can be used?
I think she might be.
40% of our town, like my city, is nonprofit organizations.
Almost 50%. 48% is tax exempt. Yeah. I agree with you. But I agree with you, but it's no different than you choosing who you want to sell your house to. The city can't intervene because they don't like the person you're about to sell to. Whether we think we should, someone on your block is getting ready to sell their house and you don't like the new person moving in, the city can't intervene because they don't like the buyer. It's the same with the institutions. It's the same with government. Providence isn't buying new property, but state government buys property much more frequently than we do. We can't prevent the state from buying a piece of property. It comes off the tax rolls when they do that also. It's just the law. I understand your frustration, and believe me, I heard the point in front here was, but then we all have to pay.
Yeah, so basically, right, so they buy all this property, now the value of my house is based on the property that surrounds me. So now I have to pay more taxes based on that. How is that fair?
So the valuation, let's get into valuation for just a second, because this year is a reval year. So many of you, if you're homeowners, received a letter from the city. And it said how much the city thinks your house is worth, right? This happens every 3 years. And that is also state law. This happens in every community in Rhode Island. Every 3 years, we reevaluate the value of your property. This year, property values went up pretty dramatically. And while it's scary to see a piece of paper that says your house is worth 30% more than it was the last time, if you watch the sales in your neighborhood, you probably know that everything has gotten quite expensive relatively recently. And so it was not a surprise to us that the values went up so high. But just because the value of your house, for example, went up 30%, does not mean the cost of your taxes will go up 30%. We haven't set the rate yet. And the rates will come down. So the way in which your tax bill is calculated, it's the value of your house times the rate equals the bill. You now have the value. When I introduce the budget in April, you'll have the rate, or the proposed rate at least, the council might change it, and then you can do the math to get your bill. We're talking about this levy cap of 4% and asking to go over the levy cap. The resolution that the city council passed out of the finance committee on Thursday put a limit on that and said, but not more than 8%. So that's a good frame of reference. It's not a guarantee because the rates haven't come out yet, but it's a good frame of reference that the proposed tax increase will be between 4 and 8%. It can't be greater than 8%. So just because your house went up 30%, your tax bill will not go up 30%. Your tax bill, in fact, will not go up more than 8%, because the rates will come down. Please.
So are you prepared as a mayor of the city of Providence, that once all this goes into effect, if the majority of the people of your city cannot afford their taxes and they become unable to pay it, what are you gonna do for your citizens?
So I am very, very sensitive to what a burden this is going to place on many of our residents, which is why we are trying very hard to balance these three categories. Other revenues, things like the parking tax, the cost of a parking ticket, cuts to city government so that we can keep the tax increase as low as possible. Those are the only ways in which we balance this budget. As I showed on the earlier point, we don't have any options about the fixed expenses. The way it works in local government is we have to pass a balanced budget. The federal government runs deficits all the time. It doesn't seem to matter, but they pass deficits all the time. State government has big swings in terms of surpluses and deficits, and then they catch up the next year. Local government, there's no one else for us to pass the buck to. We're the end of the line. You've heard the expression that stuff rolls downhill. We're downhill. And so there's no one for us to pass the buck to. We have to pass a balanced budget. The only three ways we balance a budget are through new taxes, other revenue, or cuts. I think the most responsible thing to do is to balance those three categories, understanding that some residents are going to face severe stress, and so we're trying to figure out ways to minimize that stress, to target the tax increase for the people who can afford to pay it. I think some of the revenue should come from other sources, particularly the people who come and visit our city but don't live in our city. That's why I'm going after things like parking and cuts. So just for a frame of reference on cuts, which is the last piece we haven't talked about in great detail, is this is the value of some of the things that we pay for. I'm not saying we're going to do all of these things, but we have this number. Remember I showed $7 million at the beginning? If we were to go to alternate week trash service, so you no longer got weekly trash service, but every other week trash service, we could save $4.5 million. If we eliminated funding to our libraries and community centers, $6 million. We could eliminate our summer jobs program for $350,000. We could lay off 10% of the city's workforce and save $5.5 million. And there's some other examples here. I use these as a reference point. These are real numbers, by the way, and we could do these things. But I don't want to do these things. None of us would want to do these things. And so that's where it gets to the balance, which is there are some cuts that I think we could live with, particularly if it meant you had to pay less taxes. There are some other revenues that you could tolerate, like a parking ticket that's more expensive, if the alternative was higher taxes. But I think the right answer is to find a balance and to do a little bit of all three, so that we're not doing dramatic service cuts, so that we're not doing exorbitant fees, and so that we're not doing dramatic taxes. A little bit of all three to try to balance this budget. Please.
Sometimes when government says cuts, they mean not as much increase.
I know.
What does this mean?
Yeah, that used to drive me crazy. So some of you might know I used to work for the state. I used to manage the state's budget. And departments would bring me what they called a cut, but it was actually a reduction in the increase, which is not actually a cut. I totally agree with you that that's not a real cut. When I say we're going to propose cuts, what I mean is that we are going to eliminate jobs, eliminate positions. Now keep in mind, I don't take any pleasure in this either. These are city employees who are by and large doing a good job, many of whom live in the city. But there's only three ways to balance this budget. You either cut, you either raise other revenues, or you raise taxes. So when I propose my budget, there will be real cuts, not reductions and increases, but real cuts that will be elimination of positions, defunding of certain programs, and actual cuts to city programs.
When you say
Please, Barbara. I'll be to you next.
I don't know how you would address this, but it occurred to me to ask, do we have any way of understanding if the average income of homeowners has increased to the extent that we're talking about increasing the taxes?
Yeah. If you didn't hear the question, do we have any way of knowing if the average income of homeowners has increased in any way that's commensurate with either the tax increase or the increase in value? Not really. I mean, we've got statewide economic data about wages, but we don't have anything specific for, certainly not at the neighborhood level, and some of this data is not even available at the city level, it's just at the state level. So unfortunately, not really. We do, however, and some of you might know this, I'm sure your councilman has worked with you on this in the past, we do have certain exemptions, which is one of the things that we're looking at, on property taxes. So there are certain categories of people that qualify for exemptions. There's an exemption for older residents, called the elderly exemption. There's an exemption for disabled residents. There's an exemption for veterans, and a couple other smaller exemptions. One of the things that we're looking at this year, in order to the point earlier about trying to target the tax increase to the people who can most easily afford it, which is relevant to this question as well, is looking at increasing some of the exemptions. So some of the hardest hit communities would get an extra deduction from their taxes, and therefore the increase would be even smaller. I've done this presentation a few times, and in one of the conversations I got a very passionate comment that I took very much to heart from a retired resident of the city of Providence who lives solely on his Social Security, which has not gone up in any way commiserate with the potential tax increase. However, were we to increase the elderly exemption, we could significantly address the concern for older residents who are living on a fixed income. And that is something that we are working on right now and will be addressed when I introduce the budget in April. Sir, you had another comment or question? Yeah, please. I'm sorry, could you speak a little louder? Right, so there were two questions or comments, just so that everyone can hear if you haven't heard already. First is the double-edged sword of if we lay people off, then there's one less person who's able to pay taxes. Absolutely, these are all bad choices. Not every city employee lives in the city of Providence. Obviously, we would hope and help them find new employment, but I'm very aware of that. These are all bad choices. The second comment was about new development and specifically Hasbro. Yes, I think we could all agree that it's better to have more people paying taxes and new people paying taxes than the same people paying more taxes. And so Hasbro is one of those opportunities. Hasbro has been made a proposal, I think is the right way to phrase it. They haven't made a decision on what they're doing. They've said they're leaving Pawtucket. They've said publicly that it's either Providence or Boston. I'm working really hard to try to get them to move to Providence instead of moving to Boston. The proposal that they received is for a new building on the 195 land. All of the buildings on the 195 land, whether it's Hasbro or another one, they all receive a tax stabilization, but that doesn't mean they pay nothing. Keep in mind that land right now is empty. Now it's paying nothing. Right now that land pays, if it's undeveloped, that land pays nothing. The state effectively owns it. The state does not pay taxes. Nobody's paying taxes. The tax stabilization agreements on the 195 land, they all pay taxes, and every year they pay a little bit more. And so something is more than nothing, and the opportunity to have a major employer, downtown Providence, is good for us. It is not taking the place of anything else. It is not taking anything off the tax rolls. In fact, it is putting a taxpayer on a vacant piece of tax-exempt property and putting a taxpayer on a piece of vacant property. And I hope very much, and I'm not going to quit with Hasbro until they decide. I'll get back to you because you've had a question already. Let's start here.
You say that, say something had to pay that money all at once. Is that like retroactive, or is that, so it's like a big amount this year and then the following year it's not pay as much? Or is that, you have, this big increase that would be?
Excellent question. So the question is about the school settlement and the amount that we have to pay. So the settlement was for 3 years, the first of which is the year we're in right now. So there was an additional payment after November that was due for the fiscal year 2025, which is the year that we're now just over halfway through. We've already made that payment. The fiscal 26, which is the budget year that starts in July, that's the additional 11 point something million dollars. That's obligated for next year. And then there's a commitment for 2027, which is the year after that. The reason that we have to do this that we have to do this budget solution for 2026 is because we also owe in 2027. Once we have solved this puzzle, can you go to the pie chart? Once we've solved this puzzle and established a new plateau, a new baseline, then we'll be able to absorb the 2027 proposal without having to increase your taxes again. Which is why when I look for revenue, taxes, and cuts, I'm looking for things that are recurring, not one-time fixes. So if we were to do a series of one-time fixes for July, we would just have this problem again a year later. We have to have either steady revenue, permanent savings, or steady new level of taxes in order to make that sustained and obligated commitment to the school department for the year that starts in July and then the year that starts in July after that. But that is our agreement. Our agreement was for 25, 26, and 27. 25 we're done with. 26 and 27 is what we're planning for. Sorry, sir. You had a second question. And then I'll come to you, and then I'll go there.
Just based on, like you said, a 30% new evaluation on our homes, you want to tax that at 4% or more extra this year. So the cap is 8%. So we're only getting taxed, so we're actually getting double taxed in the sense that already we're getting 4% increase on the $60,000 that they say that my house is now worth more. Plus, you want additional 4% on top of that. So
Tentatively.
The evaluation isn't enough to cover the budget.
No, so let's say we were in a normal budget year and we didn't have this extra payment to the school department. What would happen, because every year, in fact, the city does increase revenue, and it often happens what we would call natural growth. It just happens because there's either new properties on the tax rolls or values have gone up a little bit, and we stayed under the 4% cap. Then the tax rate would have to come down even further to stay under that 4% cap, and on average, most taxpayers in Providence would see their bills go up approximately 4%.
Right.
Right. So this year, 4% is not enough to balance this budget without making dramatic expense reductions, which I don't think are the right thing to do. The reason I don't want to commit to saying your taxes are going up 8% because the rates haven't been set yet, and they might not be quite that bad. We're still working on it. The reason that the council put in the 8% cap or limit is to give taxpayers some confidence or some reassurance that it won't be any worse than 8%. And in fact, we're working very hard to make it better than that. But until I release the budget in April, we won't know the exact rate. And then you'll be able to say, you'll take your new value times the new rate and see how much your personal tax bill went up.
What I'm saying is, I have $5,000 I pay in property taxes. correct? And if I go up 4%, is the highest you can go on the 5,000 or a new evaluation?
So if you're,
My tax bill is $5,000.
Rate hasn't been set.
yeah, the problem is the mill rate hasn't been set, the rate hasn't been set. However, as sort of a frame of reference, again, just to get a sense of how not bad or bad this might be, that I would take your tax bill. If your tax bill is $5,000, then 5% of that is $250, right? So your tax bill might go up between $200 and $400, because that'll be approximately 4 to 8% on the bill. But that's just for sort of peace of mind for the next couple of weeks until we release the rate. Until the rates come out, you don't actually know what your tax bill will be. And so, I'm trying to go to every neighborhood in the city to explain the process, to explain the problem, and to help people set their expectations about what we're talking about, because a lot of people understandably got really concerned by how dramatically their value went up. But the bill will go up on average between 4 and 8%, on average. And so there are outliers. So this is I'm just talking about averages here.
Because you're not basing it on my evaluation,
Correct.
you're basing it on my current bill.
For the sake of this conversation, yes. I'm sorry, Miss, you had a question. I'll get to you in a second.
Paid for the schools, does the tax go down?
The question was, after we've paid for the schools, does the tax go down? Probably, almost certainly not, because we don't expect to decrease funding to the schools in the future. Can you go to the school chart? So what probably should have happened, looking back, this is several mayors now, is that every year the school department should have gotten a little bit more money. Because every year things get a little bit more expensive. It's true for all of us. It's true in government, it's true in the school department, it's true in your household's budget. The school department probably should have gotten a little bit more money each year so that we didn't have this dramatic jump this year. But it is unlikely that the school department is going to need less money in the future. It's very unlikely that the school department is going to need less money in the future. So assuming that we don't cut the schools, then we wouldn't be able to cut taxes. This is a new baseline level of taxation to support what we owe the Providence schools.
Okay, just one more thing.
Sure.
I hope you don't consider the garbage every other week because there's trash all over the neighborhood.
Yeah.
People like myself and other people are always picking up other people's trash. If it goes 2 weeks, you're gonna get rats and it's gonna be a mess.
I think it's a terrible option that we hope to not have to do also. And I hope you all know that you're lucky to have one of, if not the best councilman in the city, and the only councilman in the city that I know of that's personally driving around and picking up some of that trash on your behalf. Yes. Great.
So nobody wants their taxes to go up, obviously.
Right.
But I think if we all have the understanding that the city of Providence schools are going to be improving, maybe we feel a little bit better about that. But we have probably the worst school system in the whole state. What are we going to do to address that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yes, thank you.
I think we all would feel better. I think we all would feel better about sending more money to the schools if we knew we were going to get better results.
Can you repeat what they?
The question was basically, we're sending more money to the schools, but the schools are giving a terrible result. They're providing a bad education for too many of our students. I share that concern. I think this really difficult news would go down easier if we knew that an extra $11 million would result in a dramatically better education for our students. I understand that. So the reason that we were in a lawsuit with the state, I mentioned this early on, is because the state's running our schools right now. They've now had our schools for 6 years. And I believe, like most residents, because we did a survey on this, that the schools are not really any better off 6 years later, and I think we should take our schools back because the state intervention has not improved the quality of our schools. So first of all, I'm fighting really hard to get our schools back. As early as this summer, I have a piece of legislation in the General Assembly to do that. The state has to sign off on that. I can't just take them back. The state has to do that. And so we have a bill to take our schools back. We also, because in addition to not educating most of our students properly, I also don't think they make very good choices about their budget. And I think they waste money. And so part of the settlement that included the extra funding gave us permission to do a financial review of their spending choices so that we could have some confidence that this extra money will actually find its way to students and teachers and not get wasted on administrators and consultants and the other nonsense that they waste money on. And so that financial review is underway right now. And we will be highlighting the ways in which I think they are wasting money. When I say financial review, I don't think anybody's stealing. I just think they're wasting it. I don't think it's resulting in a better education for our children. But that's something that I'm also very concerned about. And I think the solution is to get our schools back. We have a brand new school board that's eager to get to work. The city council shares my point of view on this entirely. We're totally on the same page on this. To take our schools back and start delivering better results for our students. Miss, and then you, and then you, and you.
So my question was, I do have my tax with the evaluation. My house went up about 30%, but then I have a plot of land that's next to my house that I don't want someone. I like having that extra space. That thing went up 500%.
Yeah. So the question is...
So my tax bill is,
I understand the question. I have a solution for you or a proposal for you. On average, most people's home values went up about 30%. The value of undeveloped land in the city went up even more dramatically. This is not unique to you. And the reason for that is because the value of undeveloped land went up. Because there's so much pressure on housing right now, vacant lots are selling for a lot of money. That establishes the value. And so I would encourage you to call the tax assessor. We can make the connection afterwards on how to do that. If you don't plan on, if anybody owns a vacant lot other than this young woman here, if you don't plan on selling it, you should consider merging the lot with your house, because then it will be assessed as just a bigger lot on your home as opposed to a developable parcel. Okay?
Just real quickly, just let me jump in and give that number. Anybody who wants to appeal your vacant lot or even your house, call 401-680-5229. Again, that's 401-680-5229. That's the tax assessor's number. So talk to them, make an appointment, and go in and appeal your case. All right.
But that would be my recommendation. If you don't plan on selling that lot, you should merge it with your lot. And we can help you with that. There's some paperwork, but it's not expensive and it's not too hard. We'll want to help you with that. You're getting taxed as if that's a potential new development. And if you have no intention of doing that, you shouldn't be paying for that, but you have to take some action. Sir?
My question is, you are raising tax, housing, parking, how it is going to affect the tourism coming to here? What are you going to do to bring more people to the state? What is the plan that you have to create new business?
So the question was, we're raising taxes, but what are we doing to actually bring new businesses, attract more tourists and visitors to our city, the other things to make our city economically more healthy. First of all, the tourism and visitor economy is actually doing quite well. The hotels are full, the restaurants are full. We have a series and increasing number of big public events. I'm not too worried about tourists and visitors. Providence is quite busy these days. The convention center is very busy. Later this week, we've got the NCAA tournament. There's a series of big events next summer. We have World Cup Soccer is playing in Foxborough, and a lot of those people will be staying in Providence. That's going to be a major, major event. I think travel and tourism is doing pretty well. Economic development and job growth has been much harder for all of Rhode Island, not just for Providence. We talked a little bit about Hasbro, but there are not major corporations moving anywhere. In fact, most major offices are shrinking, not growing right now after the pandemic. What has changed in economic development and in job growth and in business attraction these days is, the pandemic really changed everything, which is we have a lot of people moving to Providence. The reason house prices have gone up so high is because there's more people here, and there's not a lot of more new homes here. And so you have more people in basically the same amount of homes, prices go up. And the people who are moving here, they have money, and they still think Providence is cheap. And that's one of the reasons that they're moving here. They're moving here with jobs. They're moving here with jobs that are primarily either entirely remote jobs or hybrid jobs, which means they're a day a week in Boston, or even it's a New York-based job, but they can live in Providence. And even though it still feels very expensive for us, because it's way more expensive than it used to be, it's still a lot less expensive than Boston and New York. And so we do have new people moving here, and they are moving here with good jobs. They're just not based here. They're allowed to work anywhere. And so the solution to that problem is to build more housing. And housing itself is an economic development strategy. It didn't used to be, but now it is. When workers can choose to work anywhere, they're going to choose to work in a place that they want to live, and they're going to choose to work in a place where they can buy a home for an affordable price, which is why I've been working so hard to build more housing in the city. We just went through, some of you may have gone to some community meetings for the comprehensive plan, which was finished last year. Once in a decade, we update the comprehensive plan, where we've made it easier to build more housing in the city. We're putting a lot of effort into affordable housing in the city. There's about 2,000 new apartments that have been built or developed in the last 2 years, 25% of which is permanently subsidized affordable housing for low-income residents. So we're trying to build new housing. We're trying to build housing at every price point, and that'll bring down the pressure on house prices for all of us. And that will make it so that the next revaluation, which happens 3 years from now, isn't as dramatic as the one we just saw. Sir?
Yeah, two questions. Number one, this idea of getting this exception this year to go with 4% levy, is that a one-year deal? Like, so fiscal year 2027, it's back to, you can only go up 4% by law?
Yes, so, I would say, like, yes and yes. The piece of legislation that's in front of the State House specifically says for 2026 only, and I'm telling you that I have no intention of seeking to go out over the cap after this one time.
And then I guess the second thing is more of a comment, maybe it's a question, but, you know, kind of shame on all of you, like, in terms of the planning, like, is this a big surprise? You know, you mentioned the 21.9 million shortfall, obviously the payment to the PTSD for 11 is a big chunk of that. But those three other numbers, those are no surprises, right? I mean, those were contracted rates that were coming. We were all playing this game of kind of rolling the dice, saying like, hey, we're probably going to win this case, so we won't have to pay PTSD. There's no backup plan. I mean, all of this kind of is a big shock, a big all at once. I get it, but you know, I think you guys got to take a little the heat on this for not being prepared.
Absolutely.
For coming along.
It's a fair point, and I'm not afraid to hear that feedback. The other things, the contractual raises, the pension increase, we did plan for that, and within the 4% cap, we could have afforded all of that. That's the planning that we do every year. We have a pretty good idea every year what the pension cost is going to be. We have estimates on how much insurance is going to cost. We certainly know what the contractual raises are, and we do 5-year financial projections, and we plan ahead for those things. And within the 4% cap, we could have paid for all of that. What we can't pay for under the 4% cap is the additional payment to the school department. Then, to the second point of the feedback of, well, shouldn't you have planned for the school department piece? I feel very strongly that we got a raw deal. That's why we pursued this thing for 5 years. The way the state legislation read, and Representative Slater, by the way, deserves a round of applause because this is well before I got elected to office, saw this problem and has been trying to fix it in state legislation, and at times was the only person trying to fix it in state legislation, but the rest of the state was not willing to change the legislation. But the way this legislation, the thing that we sued over, read was when a school district is under state intervention, right now Providence is the only school district that's under state intervention, the city must increase funding at the same percent that the state increases funding. Philosophically, what we think they meant, this is on a state law that has never been tested before, that was passed a couple decades ago, was it's a partnership. The state's running the schools, they don't want the state to pick up the entire tab, the city can't just walk away from its responsibility. Our interpretation was, sure, if the state increases funding to Providence, then we should increase funding to match. The state's interpretation is, if we increase funding statewide, the city should have to increase its funding. And over the last 5 years, there were years where the state funding actually went down to Providence, but up statewide. And we're having to pay the bill on that. The judge actually said in the court case, I understand the city's point of view, and they should get that fixed at the General Assembly, but the law says what the law says. And so the judge empathized with us, but felt like the law was clear. We thought that the judge would understand the consequences of his decision, and we also felt like the governor and the commissioner of education would not go for maximum pain, which is what they did. And because this is a suit between two parties. And they put the screws to us, despite us explaining this. I think if anyone was following the press last year, you saw some angry press conferences and the whole thing. That's what this was all about. And so I hear your point, shame on us that we didn't plan for the loss of this lawsuit, but we tried to win vigorously and we pursued every avenue possible to do so, and we hit the end of the road. There were no legal mechanisms left available to us. Please. Hi, nice to see you.
Good to see you too. I have one quick question, and I guess it pertains to new revenue. We're gonna, like we mentioned, there's a lot of people moving in, maybe working remotely, and they're in those high-end new apartments that are being built up all over. Do we gain from that? Does the city of Providence gain from those developments?
Yeah, those apartment buildings all pay taxes, and that's to the previous point. The big ones have mostly been built on the 195 land, and so those were places that were paying zero taxes, and now they're paying taxes. Some of the kind of mid-sized ones that are getting filled in the neighborhood, for example, near the public safety complex, there's a couple new apartments back there on like West Fountain Street and Washington Street. Those, for example, replaced a couple, for example, auto body shops and things. So that replaced the current taxpayer, but it's something bigger now. And just like all of you got a revaluation, we also do revals on apartment buildings. And all of those people got a letter also. And the values on their buildings all went up, which means their tax bills are all going to go up as well. So we do gain from that. We gain more tax revenue. The bigger the building, the more valuable the building, the more they pay in taxes. Let me just, someone has a chance to ask a question.
I have two. One is if the state doesn't sign off on it and just moves back, we still have to pay that money.
Yeah, the question was, if the state doesn't sign off on us getting the schools back, do we still have to pay the money? Yes, we are, to the previous question, we have a legal settlement stamped by a judge that obligates us to 25, which is the year we're in now, 26 and 27, regardless of who controls the schools. Please. I'm just so you know, I'm trying to call in some folks who haven't had a chance to answer a question yet, but I'm not going anywhere.
So it appears that everybody got their evaluations. I didn't know anything about it. I did not get one.
So you should call that number that Jim just read out, and we can say it again. Call the tax assessor. Maybe a problem with the postal
How
service.
long has it been since they've gotten one?
Probably 3 weeks.
So fairly recent.
Yeah. 2 weeks?
No, about a month.
A month now? Okay. Time's a blur. Please, sir, in the back.
Have you considered or are you willing to consider income cap on eligibility for the elderly exemption?
The question is, are we willing to consider an income cap for the eligibility for the elderly exemption? It's something we would be willing to consider, but we would have to balance the ability for us to implement it. The city doesn't currently collect income information from any of our residents. I don't know which ones of you are millionaires and which one of you are on Medicaid. And so that would be, Dave Town's a millionaire. So that would be a new process that we don't currently do, but it's a reasonable question, and there are certainly some wealthy senior citizens in the city that don't need the exemption. I understand the point. There would be a balance between whether we could actually implement that or not, because of course we have to request the income information from everyone in order to exclude some people. There are probably some easier markers for need than something like asking for everyone's household income. Things like if you're eligible, if you're dual eligible for Medicaid and Medicare, or if you're on food assistance or SNAP or some other program that independently and separately verifies income, that might be able to provide an additional exemption as I think about ways in which we might implement this. But I am not trying to give wealthy elderly residents an additional tax cut. Pat?
There's typically a very strict deadline on assessment appeals, aren't there? I was wondering if people should know that. This isn't something you can sit on.
So the assessment appeal window has closed. However, and that was clearly outlined in your letter. However, the assessor's office remains open for phone calls and questions. That is not, however, your only way to appeal. Even if you don't appeal your value, if you have not appealed your value or scheduled an appointment to appeal your value, all taxpayers have the option of appealing their taxes when the tax bill comes out in July. You can appeal your taxes when the tax bill comes out in July. I want to make a very important note, however, and this is a law, so this isn't a policy choice, this is a requirement. In order to appeal your taxes, you must be current on your taxes. So if you choose to dispute your taxes when the bill comes out in July, you still have to make that first payment. Because if you don't make your payment, you forfeit your right to appeal. And so you appeal your tax, you make your payment, and you make your appeal, and then if you're successful, they'll credit it on the next payment. But if you don't make your payment, you're not eligible to appeal. That's a very important note. Please, sir.
Going back to this, so gentlemen, you guys' fiscal responsibility, that looking at last year's budget, I noticed 7% increase here, 9% increase here, 16% increase here, all over the place, increases, knowing you're only getting a 4% increase from us. I'm just wondering, where does all this magic money come around? That we can give 7% over here, 9%, when taxes are only supposed to go up 4%. And what assurities do we have that you guys will start staying within a 4% increase in budgets and stop giving our money away?
So I don't know which categories you're talking about.
Police department, fire department,
Nobody's gotten a 7 or 17% increase in
No.
raises.
Well, there was a 7-9%, that's what I saw just on the last year, 7 to 9%.
The total cost of the department might have gone up that much because we've hired new police officers.
That's what I'm saying.
Right, but, so, the accountability, which is totally fair for you to demand accountability from me, I have run a balanced budget the last 2 years, and actually, you know, again, back to the previous question about the settlement of the school department, we owed money in the current year. We were able to pay that amount without asking for more taxes because, one, we had been fiscally responsible in the current year. We went onto a hiring freeze and a spending freeze the minute that lawsuit was settled, and that's how we were able to pay the fiscal 25 budget. The increases for our police officers and our firefighters and our public employees are all 3 or 4%. The total budget's going up because we have more police officers than we used to have. We also have more firefighters than we used to have. But you know what happens with both, especially with police and fire? If you don't hire more police or firefighters, you pay the same number of police and firefighters exorbitant overtime, which is, in addition to the fact that it's more expensive, it's also unsafe to them and unfair to them. Because police and fire in particular, which are both two very big and expensive departments, they have mandatory minimum staffing levels that if we don't fill it with people, we fill it with people on overtime. If we don't have new people, we fill it with people on overtime. So we have lived within our 4% cap every year except for this year. We've not gone over the cap. The last time the city of Providence went over the cap was when Mayor Alvarez was there. This is not a frequent occurrence. And the assurance that you have that this won't happen again is that I've shown that I'm fiscally responsible. This is a unique year with a unique amount of money that we have to sell for a very understandable reason. And we're not going to face this ever again because this issue is now resolved.
Yeah, but like she was saying, with the school department, we pay, if I'm right, $25,000 per student for education.
That's about 20,000.
Okay, a private is 19.
Right.
So, I mean, by their own records, it's 25. By their own budget. They say 25 here at Providence. And a private education is 19 at Hinderman. So, I mean, what are we going to do to start equalizing the quality of education?
We can and should do a whole community meeting on schooling.
Quality of services.
I totally agree with you that the quality of the education that we're providing in Providence Public Schools is inadequate. What I will say on the per pupil amount, because this is a question that I ask my staff a lot, it may be $19,000 to go to LaSalle, but if you have a student with special needs, and you place them in a private school, it could be $100,000. And in the Providence Public Schools, we educate everyone. And more often than not, if you have a student with special learning needs, you're sending them to the public schools because we educate everyone. And actually, the education, the tuition at many of the private schools is very different if you have a student that requires special services. And honestly, one of the things that's killing the Providence Public School budget is special ed. And I'm not in any way suggesting that we don't provide an adequate education to every student, we should. But the public school system, this is not unique to Providence, but public school systems bear a disproportionate share of the special ed costs because it's the educator of last resort. And for families who have students who have extraordinary needs, they know, and they should know, this is the right thing to do, that they can send their kids to public school and their kids' needs will be met, and honestly, some of their kids' needs aren't being met as well as they should be. That's just the reality of public education, and I'm not advocating for anything different. This is what we believe as a community and as America. Everyone deserves a free public education, regardless of what your level of need is. But special ed is the primary driver of the budget increases at Providence Public Schools. And the reason that per pupil number seems so skewed is because we educate everyone. regardless of their language needs, their physical needs, their emotional needs. We educate everyone, no matter what, no questions asked, and I think that's the right thing to do. Are there other questions? Oh, Dave, I'm sorry. Jeez. It's your meeting. You get to ask as many questions as you want.
Yeah, I wanted to wait till all my neighbors had a chance to speak first, but I'd like to make a few suggestions to you to consider as far as reducing spending.
Please.
Part of your presentation talked about ideas you didn't really want to consider about reducing the 45% of the city budget that is now related to schools. You know, picking up garbage, police, fire, community centers, libraries, rec centers, which I think everybody here would pretty much object to any of those. But 55% of the city budget is for schools. And I know you don't control that, at least probably for another year and a half. They're not going to be able to do a lot of the things they'd like to be able to do. But you do have advisory ability. You can make public statements. You have the bully pulpit as the mayor. We can make recommendations on how to reduce unnecessary spending in the schools. I'm assuming you meet one-on-one with Commissioner Infante Green. At some point, you have the ability in a private conversation to give some of these ideas to her, which I know she's usually willing to listen to serious thoughts. So I'd like to share some of those ideas with you right now. And the biggest one that I think we can make savings on is transportation. Right now, that's $22 million a year to bus 9,000 kids in elementary school or middle school. And it's not by choice. The school department will tell you, yes, people choose to do that. Not true. I believe 50% of the 9,000 kids who are being bused, if given the real choice of going to a school in their own neighborhood and walking there, would take that choice. 50% would not. If that were to happen, that would save $10 million right there. Almost the same amount you're looking for in additional money. And, you know, in addition to saving money, it would have educational benefits, because most people agree the biggest problem with schools' performance is chronic absenteeism, which would be solved if all the kids in the same neighborhood were walking together to school, and parental involvement, parents helping their kids and knowing what's going on in the schools, which is hard to do if their kids are being bused miles away and the parents don't have use of a car. Roughly about 50% of the families in the poorest section of the city don't have use of a car during the day. So that would be a really huge saving. And I didn't make this idea up myself. This was actually seriously proposed by the most recent superintendent in Providence, before the current one, Harrison Peters, who was brought here to this city by current Commissioner Infante Green. And he was actually working on exactly what I just suggested. And then he had to leave for various reasons. And as soon as he left, the idea disappeared. Before that, the Director of Operations for the city, one of the top assistants there, Robin Buxian, was working on exactly the same idea. She had done a study on how many kids were being bused in all the schools in the city and found it was a ridiculous number. Like only 50% of the kids were being able to walk to school, rather than the 80% that the school department actually has as a policy, is supposed to be able to walk to school. So these are two really serious education people that have proposed exactly what I'm suggesting, and there's a huge potential for saving money. On a kind of a subset of that, the Washington Park neighborhood adjacent to this one had the only school in the entire neighborhood closed a year ago, mainly because the school was falling apart due to lack of maintenance by a previous mayor, certainly not by you. And the city decided it was cheaper to close the school and bus the kids elsewhere instead of paying the money to fix the school. What I think we should do is recruit a charter school like Achievement First or Excel Academy to come in and take over that school, fix it at their own expense, which those two schools have the money to do and have done with some of the schools that have taken over in Providence. And then give preference to kids who live in that neighborhood, again, something they're allowed to do under state law. And I believe several hundred kids who are now being bused all over the entire city from the Washington Park neighborhood would take that option and go to that school, and that would save $500,000 just in busing costs right there. Beyond that, you already mentioned that part of the deal you made with the Commissioner of Education and the courts was to allow you to do an audit of their uncover, not fraud, but uncover waste and excessive spending. And so, you know, one of the things, when I'm finished talking, I'd like to hear you talk about is who you have doing that audit, and if you're able to give any preliminary findings that they've made. But I can pretty much predict some of the things that they're going to find, and I'm going to give you 4 of those. One of them is the bloated bureaucracy in the school department office. You know, you go down there and it's loaded with people and nobody really knows what they're doing. The number is increasing, even while the number of kids in the traditional public schools has dropped from 24,000 to 19,000 just over the last 10 years. So basically, I think you could save probably $1 million there by eliminating unnecessary people. Another one is one that you've actually talked about yourself, and that's, we had all this COVID.
So if you can,
All right, give me just a
summarize,
minute or two.
yeah, thank you.
When they had all this COVID money that the federal government gave us, the school department went ahead and they hired a lot of people, knowing that the money wasn't going to be there after a year or two. You told them not to do that. They did it anyway. Once you're in a position to do something about it, I think we need to look at which of those people might be nice to have, but they're not really essential.
Yep.
Another thing is,
Dave, could you please just allow us to finish the meeting?
all right, let me just chew up the other ideas. One was a lot of private contracts.
Yep.
And again, I'm assuming your auditors are checking into them.
Yeah.
And the final thing is the state commission that just issued a report card for every school in the entire state. And I looked at the ones in Providence, and among, besides the academic part, it gave the average cost per student of each individual school in the whole city. And it was roughly $17,000 for every school. And then at the end, they gave a summary of the whole city, and the average cost per student for the whole city is $27,000, a $10,000 difference. So it means it looks like there's a lot of money that's being spent not to educate the kids in the schools, but for other purposes.
Okay, this is like the art.
So,
Play the music.
so anything, could you tell us who you have doing the audit, and can you tell us any preliminary findings?
Sure. So the firm that's doing the audit is a company called A&M, Alvarez and Marcel. They're national experts in this. They're absolutely looking at central administrative costs. They're looking at private contractors. It's related to central administration, this spread between the cost per pupil at the school level and the overall cost per pupil. And on the transportation point, which is something you've been a great advocate for, in the school department, the 3 largest contracts, probably no surprise, is busing, food service, and facilities maintenance. The janitors in our schools are all private contractors, the people who serve lunch, and the buses. That's where the big money is. Those are the 3 big contracts, and if we can save money in any of those 3 places is how we can really move the needle. But we will be sure to brief you on the outcomes of that audit. Are there any final questions? And we're pushing 8 o'clock. I'm not trying to shoo us out, but I know it's been a long meeting already. Are there final questions on?
One quick question.
Yes, please.
Is the Providence Place Mall affecting us?
The question is the Providence Place Mall affecting any of this? No. That gentleman left already, but Providence Place Mall has a long-term tax stabilization agreement it's almost 30 years old now. And so regardless of who's in the mall or not, or tenants that are coming and going, they pay the same amount by agreement. And so they're on schedule, they haven't missed any payments. The mall is certainly going through a transition right now, but this has not affected this at all. Last question.
Just wanted to commend you for taking an 8% decrease in your office and other places. I did notice that you did cut a lot of stuff for your personal expenses and other things. I'm just questioning some of the other increases.
It's a very fair question, but I have absolutely tried to lead by example. And in the budget that I will put out in a couple weeks, you will see more sacrifices in a tangible savings so that you feel like this is not being put on taxpayers alone, but that we're all doing our part. Thank you for giving me a chance to explain this.
So just real quickly, I want to highlight on a couple things. Obviously, thank you, Mayor, for coming out and doing this. It means a lot to me. As you know, the first 4 years that I was council, I had zero contact with the mayor. We didn't talk for 4 years. And also, I'm not blaming the other mayor, but for 4 years under Mayor Loza, we didn't raise taxes at all. So that's one reason we're in the GM that we are. Plus, going to Scott, I know he said something. Thanks to them and the state, just to give you a quick, that I actually learned during this process, is that they never did the revals before. It used to be one time every 10 years. So imagine what 10 years ago you got a reval in 2015, and then you got a reval now. Your taxes were like through the roof. At least we've been doing it for 3 years. Not that it helps, but I mean, unfortunately, there's not enough houses, not enough demand. Right. So it has smoothed out since then, doing it every 3 years. Unfortunately, this year is just like through the roof, and the school department didn't help. But we are funded with the pension, which we weren't before. So we are catching up with things. But I just personally want to thank the mayor, because when this all happened, he can tell you that I reached out with my list of things like Dave has, and if you people have anything, feel free to reach out to me and the city council. City of Providence Ward 8, and plug it. City of Providence Ward 8, if you have Facebook. But no, you can reach out with a message, send me your stuff. I will send it over to the mayor, and we still have a few weeks before the budget comes out. And that's why he's here, to hear all of us, including me. But I'm working for you, so, thank you for everybody for coming out. The whole triangle got flooded, and this was probably one of the best meetings as far as like 60 people. Not bad, better than 10 that used to come. But thank you for all coming out. I know you guys have a busy schedule and everything, but I just want to thank the mayor for coming out. I appreciate the one-on-one with all you from the mayor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Mr. Questions or comments? Yeah.
I know.